Now, here's very interesting, though. This is an article in the Times that shows exactly what the thinking is behind the scenes. And again, there are two camps here. There's the Starmer camp and the David Cameron One Nation Conservative camp. But both of them are chucking Sunak under the bus. So in this one, it says, on Thursday, the Prime Minister left the D-Day commemorations early in a move that is likely to go down as the biggest own goal of the election campaign. It was instead left to Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, famously where Jeremy Clarkson is, the Foreign Secretary, to fill the void and stand side by side with three of the most powerful men in the world: President Biden, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, and President Macron of France. Obviously, they've both suffered election defeats in the last week. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, stayed on for the event and even managed to secure a bilateral meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine on the sidelines. And that's fascinating. How did the incumbent Prime Minister, leader of the opposition, show up to secure a meeting with those guys? I mean, obviously, Keir Starmer, who famously said he prefers Davos to Westminster, who is the underling of Tony Blair, has a lot of pull on the international stage because the global UN international institution consensus has picked him as their man. He is Davos man. So even though he is not yet Prime Minister, he's presumably the next leader, and Sunak goes walkabout while Keir Starmer personally talks to Zelensky, presuming he'll be the one that's dictating the UK's foreign policy in a couple of years. It shows who's really running the show over there. Fascinating. For a Prime Minister whose election pitch is predicated on security, defence and patriotism, I mean, if you've seen the Tories' first-party political broadcast, it's all essentially prepare for war, right? The Tory MPs said it was a spectacular, quote, error of judgment. Ken Hay, a 98-year-old D-Day veteran who landed on Juno Beach with the 4th Infantry Dorset Regiment, good man, said that Sunak had let down the country and accused him of electioneering. Cabinet ministers were furious. The amount of people that have gone on record here, but have redacted their names just to throw their boss under the bus is fascinating. It's a significant and very serious error, said one. Another added, the cut-through is huge because it's wrong on every level. It's a failure of leadership. The real question for this election is not whether Keir Starmer wins, that's a given. It's how many people are left on the green benches opposite. After the fallout, the mood in Conservative campaign headquarters was described as a funeral. One insider said, I've never heard it so quiet. Now, I'm willing to bet these cabinet ministers are orbiting around Michael Gove and David Cameron, if not those guys themselves, right? Because Cameron's team seem to be running damage control on this, but to distance David Cameron from Rishi Sunak's decision, and it's to cement the One Nation Conservative legacy as apart from their hand-picked candidate in the successor to William Hague, Rishi Sunak himself. After Sunak's apology, the backlash grew into wall-to-wall coverage. Staff were so rattled they resorted to shouting profanities at the television. So in CCHQ, cigarette paper between the two of them, they were all shouting at the screen because they were so frustrated that Sunak had misled them this way. Labour strategists couldn't believe their luck. Quote, it's genuinely mind-boggling why they made that decision, said one senior party figure. They're not engaging in gender-correct pronouns there. They're referring to the whole Conservative apparatus. But why did he decide to leave? Well, now this is the interesting part, because there's more from the Times here. This is an interesting article with a hilarious caption, which is quite fascinating. Rishi Sunak with a sandcastle Downing Street. Clearly some sort of AI that's gone on there. Rather amusing, but anyway, Infighting on the Beaches, it's titled. Very good. So Rishi Sunak's aides realised that this interview with ITV's Paul Brand on Thursday afternoon was going to be a problem hanging over them for the better part of a week. In a 25-minute grilling, to be broadcast on Wednesday, so that's this Wednesday, tomorrow. Oh, no, sorry, today as you're watching this probably. The Prime Minister endured a torrid time over his personal wealth, leading to frank exchanges with his interviewer. Quote, that's what they were worried about, said a political source, that he was beaten up over the money and being out of touch. While they focused on the incoming shelling, no one seemed to notice Sunak had already stepped on a landmine. Now, the interview that he ducked out of the international ceremony to do is going to prove to be a PR disaster as well. So it's just constant screw-ups from the Sunak camp here ahead of an election they're already absolutely going to lose. Frankly embarrassing. So it's almost like at this point that they've got their hearts set on 0 seats. That's an official policy, that Sunak may well have made that fake campaign video that Nima Parvini knocked up to set the meme in motion, and that this is some kind of political hair shirt he's wearing to humiliate himself as much as possible for screwing up the economy as Chancellor during lockdowns. Other than that, you really have to believe that he has absolutely no political acumen. And I think that's actually true. But jokes aside, I think that he doesn't know how bad this looks. And I'll get onto why in a moment, because I wrote a small thing on this that I think I just need to read out because it sums it up better than I can off the cuff now. But anyway, some more of the inside details. The decision that Sunak would attend the British parts of the D-Day commemorations but dodge the international event was made weeks ago. Quote, the official advice was that the second bit was optional, a senior political source said. This is why you never trust the experts. We were told Starmer wouldn't be there. Fascinating that. They were told Starmer wouldn't be there. Now, why would you presume that the leader of the opposition is going to show up to the D-Day commemoration event? You would assume it's only the world leaders themselves and the members of the cabinet, especially during an election event. It's because, of course, Tony Blair probably pulled the strings to have Starmer be there to look prime ministerial in waiting and have a conversation with Zelensky to set him up as establishing strong diplomatic relations ahead of setting the UK's foreign policy. And so Blair's pulled a blinder against the Tories, even though Blair himself was swanning around the Foreign Office trying to advise various foreign secretaries, including Liz Truss, as she confirmed in our interview. Quote, at that point, it seemed like the second half would be a little more than social gathering for world leaders. Here's the quote. It was billed as a lunch and that even Biden wouldn't be there, a second source said. In the event, it was one of the most moving ceremonies of the two-day gathering, with Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, substituting for Sunak and standing alongside the American and French presidents. Civil servants declared that it was a political decision to cut things short. One of Cameron's closest allies also let it be known they'd advised Sunak to, quote, do the full schedule. See? Cameron's allies are leaking to the press, the Times, which is essentially the mouth of Sauron for the One Nation Tories. I mean, as soon as Miriam Cates was censored by her own party with a bogus investigation, that same day, the Bright Blue crowd came out with an op-ed under the rubric of the One Nation Tories saying that the far right in the Tory party have had their time, but now the adults are in the room. So the Times is utter liberal capitulation containment. And they're getting sources from David Cameron and other cabinet ministers saying, we had no part of this, we advised against it, Rishi Sunak is not our creature. You're seeing the political strategy at play here. They're trying to set it up so that the One Nation Tories can continue destroying the country from in opposition. And that can't be allowed to happen, right? A Whitehall source said Cameron was apologetic about Sunak's decision, but when asked why he hadn't picked Sunak up by the lapels, he said, there's only so much I can do. See? Not my fault. I did all I could. Don't blame David Cameron for this, is the narrative. A Tory who is no fan of Boris Johnson said, there was absolutely no way that if you presented this to Boris or indeed Theresa May, telling him it was a waste of time, they would not have overruled this advice. This is the worst operation I've ever seen. From the Prime Minister down, there is a combination of arrogance and sheer incompetence. So, again, torching Sunak and his legacy, distancing him from the continuity candidates they hope to establish. But the most interesting part of this, as I suggested, Keir Starmer was planted there by Tony Blair. The interesting detail in this article, it says, neither David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, eventual Foreign Secretary, nor Keir Starmer were originally invited to the international event, but Lammy used his contacts to get them both admitted and his connections with Zelensky's team to ensure there would be a Starmer handshake and a photograph of the Ukrainian president, and as previously reported, a private meeting. David Lammy's contacts. It's got to be Blair. Let's be fair. That's not even conspiratorial at this point, right? I mean, Blair's even embedded in the Conservative Party conferences with his Tony Blair Institute panels. And as Truss said, he's got a 100 billion quid war chest. So he's just spaffing that away on everything. So, obviously, this is why the Tories are losing, right? They're taking advice from the arch technocrats. But within their ranks are people trying to slow down the technocracy. So why would they not just double down on the fully technocratic party, which are the Labour Party, now that they've become more electable than Sunak? And so they're just throwing Sunak under the bus. But how did Sunak himself allow this mistake to be made and make this obvious faux pas? Well, I wrote this. I think this sums it up perfectly. So I'm just going to read it out. Rishi Sunak's choice to leave the D-Day anniversary event early demonstrates that patriotism is a second-order concern to our managerial political class. It didn't even occur to him that being truant from the ceremony would cause offence. In his heart, he doesn't feel he belongs to Britain over anywhere else. He can move anywhere if it offers better job prospects. You can see it in the language of his apology, and he actually issued an apology down here. And I'll read a little bit of it. The 80th anniversary of D-Day has been a profound moment to honour the brave men and women who put their lives on the line to protect our values, our freedom, and our democracy, right? So that language is pathetic. Because I say, D-Day was apparently about preserving the rootless doctrine of the international liberal order. Our values, our freedom, our democracy rings hollow. It can, and has already, been said by any leader anywhere in Europe and the Anglosphere. Notice how he doesn't speak about anything exclusive to Britain or its people. He doesn't, and he can't, say that we owe a debt to our ancestors for the sacrifices they made to protect our shires and our cathedrals, because he himself feels no kinship or connection with them. He doesn't partake in the national faith. He was parachuted into a safe seat constituency that he purports to represent, but he spends very little time there. It was William Hague's constituency that has voted Tory safely since 1906. William Hague, by the way, being the apparent opponent to Blair, but who has since teamed up with Blair to support ID cards since the pandemic, and has said, we live in the age of migration. Even right-wingers know we need migration now. That's right, I'm a conservative. He speaks of values that can be worn and shorn like a coat. They have no hold over him, which cannot be shed for his convenience. No wonder he made such a catastrophic blunder, because that day, D-Day, means no more to him than another day ending in Y. That is why apathy has taken hold, and why many patriotic people across Britain, feel the Conservative Party no longer represents them. And underneath this, I pointed out, the difference is so self-evident between him and Nigel Farage, who goes every single year. And that's the important thing. Rishi Sunak didn't even know how bad this would look because he doesn't care. And it's not contempt, it's total apathy. The opposite of love is not hatred, it's apathy. He didn't even know how bad it would look because he's not tied to Britain any more than he is Dubai or California or any homogenous cosmopole that offers him better job prospects and a private school for his kids and lower tax, despite raising our taxes to the highest burden since 1948. It's pitiful. And this is what David Starkey pointed out, actually, and he got in a lot of trouble for it with the press, but he was absolutely right. So this was during the coronation last year now. Blimey, I'm old. And he was on GB News doing the coverage, like I was at the time, actually, outside Buckingham Palace on those very uncomfortable, tottery chairs. And GB News presenter, I think it was Alistair Stewart, had asked David Starkey why Mr. Sunak was seemingly detached from the coronation preparations, because he wasn't particularly present until the ceremony itself. And Starkey said he had been invisible. It was a quote. And the quote is as follows. I think one of the reasons that I think that a lot has gone wrong, for example, why Parliament has not been properly represented at the coronation of a parliamentary monarchy, is because the government simply isn't interested. It's not interested in the Constitution. You have a Prime Minister, I think a man of immense talent, of extraordinary skill, but who is really not fully grounded in our culture. Now, I know that's a difficult and controversial thing to say, but I think it's true. And again, this coronation is going to highlight far too much, I think, our differences rather than what unites us. And Starkey agreed when it was put to him that his remarks were meant in terms of religion. So Rishi Sunak, being a practicing Hindu, caring more about Diwali than the Christian king currently being coronated at the time. And he went on to criticize attendees being invited to say the Lord's Prayer in their own language. He said, quote, "It's going to be rebuilding the Tower of Babel." Now, this is strong language coming from Professor Starkey, who has told me personally he's a Nietzschean, right? And it's gay man, so might be some personal qualms with Christian social teaching there. I think that's fair to say. It takes an Archbishop of Canterbury called Welby to rebuild the Tower of Babel. Again, there is a profound problem now, I think, everywhere in the text of the coronation service where you'd expect to find nation, it's plural. And this is same with King Charles saying he's going to be defender of the faiths, and he doesn't mean just all denominations of Christianity. He also means Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and any old Jedi who wanders through Westminster Abbey. I mean, it's absurd. But Rishi Sunak, not being a Christian, being married to an Indian heiress, having still held a green card at the time he was running for Parliament before becoming Chancellor, because he could have just buggered off to California at any time to go back to work for Goldman Sachs. He's an anywhere man. He's rootless. For him, it would be very convenient if everywhere was the same. And so what ends up happening is that anywhere men make everywhere identical, and that's closer to being nowhere than it is closer to being somewhere. And the somewheres are the ones offended by the fact that he disrespected our particular history by not going to the D-Day commemoration service, the international one at least. Thank you for watching that clip from Tomlinson Talks. If you liked that and you would like to see more, you can get the full 90-minute show every week on a Wednesday afternoon, live from 3 p.m. only on lotuseaters.com, and all of the other content that my colleagues produce behind the paywall for as little as £5 a month. Thank you very much for supporting us, and I hope to see you there. Until next time, goodbye.